Hi, I'm Hector Garcia. I'm a CPA and an advanced QuickBooks Pro advisor. QuickBooks Online is one of my favorite software packages, and I have a lot of clients that use it. One of the most common things that anyone does in QuickBooks Online is pull reports or generate reports. When you first log into QuickBooks, the first thing you're going to see is the dashboard. In the dashboard, you're going to see a group of transactions here called invoices, split up by unpaid and paid. You can actually click on any of these. For example, if I click on the undue amount, it's going to send me straight into the invoice dashboard, which is going to show me all the invoice by invoice, sorted by the ones that are paid, unpaid. I can actually click on any of the icons in the top, and it will filter the reports and only show the ones that are due, overdue, the ones that have been paid or partially paid, and the ones that have been fully paid and deposited. So that's the function of the dashboard. All of the components of the dashboard are things that you can click on. I can click on expenses, and it will take me into a report. So it's all different behavior. This one will send me to a report of all the expenses by detail. If I click on the profit and loss dashboard, it will send me into a standard profit and loss report, a very commonly used report. If I click on the sales dashboard, that one actually doesn't do anything. If I click on the bank accounts dashboard, any of these, it will send me straight into the banking area of QuickBooks. So there's a little box on the top right called privacy. If I click that, and that's often called Starbucks mode, basically it turns off the dashboard just in case you happen to be in a public place and you open QuickBooks and you just don't want all that information to be seen in your screen. So that's what that little checkbox that says privacy is for. Here in the bottom right, there's a little link that says see all activity. It's kind of hard to spot, but if you click on see all activity, it will send you actually to an audit log, which is kind of a report of every single login, logout, transaction edited, new item, new account created. Pretty much anything that you do in QuickBooks, it's shown right there in the audit log. Okay, so that's the dashboard in a nutshell. That's the first thing you see when you first log into QuickBooks. All the reports are actually in the reports tab. So when you click on the left hand side on reports, it will send you into the report screen. In the report screen, you're going to see in the top all reports. Typically where you're going to be most commonly, you're going to see custom reports. These are the reports that we customized and saved. Then you're going to see management report, which actually allows you to bundle or group reports together, put a cover page, put some text. This is really to create presentations around reports. Let's focus on the all reports. So we're going to click on all reports, and then the first thing you're going to see is favorites. If I click on favorites, I can collapse and expand. If I click on business overview, collapse and expand as well. So all of these can actually be collapsed if you want to kind of get a general idea of what all the options are. You collapse them all, and they're grouped into these categories: business overview, who owes you, sales and customers, what you owe, expenses and vendors, sales tax, employees, my accountant, and payroll. Okay, so if I click on business overview, I'm going to see all the important reports, starting with the profit and loss summary report. You will notice that this one has a star, a green star on it, basically moving it to the favorites. You're going to see a balance sheet report, which is also going to have a green star on it, moving it to the favorites. It happens to be another version of these reports that I really wanted to put on the favorites, like the statement of cash flow. All I have to do is actually click on the little star, okay, to mark it green. There you go, mark green. And now when I click on favorites, you're going to see that statement of cash flows is part of my favorite. If I don't want to see accounts receivable aging summary, in my favorites, I just unclick the star and it goes away. Perfect. Now to run reports, all I have to do is click on the actual title itself where it says profit and loss. I can click on that and that will send me to the report. And from default, I can run the report as is. You're going to notice that the default date in this case is this year to date. So that's going to be the default date that shows up every time you run a report. You can actually manually change the date range if you want to. So if you wanted to show only March, for example, I can actually go in and select the month of March. And I'll just select the beginning date and the end date, and I'll click on Run Report, and that will show me a profit and loss for March. Now, I can also use the default drop-down menu here. I can pick this month or this year or last week or last quarter, whatever I want, and it would actually do it dynamically based on whatever today's current date is. So today's date is actually April 30th. So if I do last month, it's going to show me March. Okay, so it really depends on the day that you're actually running the report, and this will always be dynamic. But if you manually select the date range instead of choosing something from the drop-down menu, it will automatically just show you exactly the days that you chose. Now, a couple of important pieces. There's a little button here that says collapse. If I click on collapse, it will hide all the sub accounts. Okay, to add some context to this, I'm going to click on the gear icon at the top right, and then I'm going to click on chart of accounts, and then I'm going to scroll down a little bit to show you what a sub account is. So I'm going to go into my expenses, and for example, you see job expenses, and then a subcategory of cost of labor, subcategory of installation. You see there's multiple layers to job expenses, and also with materials. Job materials is a sub account of job expenses, and it even has a subcategory called decks and patios. So that's sub accounts, and sub accounts are something that could be valuable depending on what you're trying to achieve, or they may not be. So if I actually expand the report, all the subcategories are going to show. Now, while the reports are expanded, so they're not collapsed, while they're expanded, I can manually choose which ones I want to collapse and expand by simply just clicking on the little triangle. So by clicking on the triangle, I can pick and choose which ones I want to collapse and which ones I want to expand. So that's under the expanded mode. If I actually click on collapse, it's not just going to collapse them, it's also going to hide the capacity of me collapsing the accounts and the sub accounts. Now I can still collapse the major category under collapse mode, so I can actually collapse expenses, other expenses, cost of goods sold, and work in this very simple system of category types for accounts. But you want to be either expanded or collapsed without collapsing the major categories if you want to see any of the details based on your chart of accounts. Now, your chart of accounts dictates this entire report, the profit and loss and the balance sheet. So you may have to play with the chart of accounts, and I'll put a video in the description below about configuring chart of accounts. You may need to work with that first before you even run reports, so these reports make sense. A couple of things that you can do with this report too is you can click on sort, and you can sort by descending order, which is a very typical thing, which I want to see the big numbers in the top and the little numbers in the bottom in each of the major categories. So that's another very commonly used feature. If you click on add notes, we'll click on add notes over here, or edit notes, it will send me to the footer where I can put unverified or unaudited or whatever it is that you want to put. So by putting that note in there, it sits there, right? So when you print it, when you save it as a PDF, whatever it is that you're doing, you can see the note there, right? You are always going to see in the bottom here the basis, whether it's accrual or cash, and the date and the time that the report was created. Okay, because if you add a transaction or modify a transaction after you run the report, you can essentially run the exact same report in the future and get different numbers altogether. You can also click on the title itself. You can modify the company name if you need to. You can also modify the name or the title of the report. That can be done on the fly by clicking on any of the text or clicking on that little pencil icon that you see after the company name. Now, the other things you're going to see here is the email button. So basically by clicking on that, it's going to send me to a different screen where it'll give me a preview of this report in PDF, and then you can click on email and it will send me to another screen where I can actually put who I want to send the report to. If I want to send that to my accountant, to a partner, to another employee, whatever it happens to be, that's the way to do it. Now the little print icon, that will send it to the print screen. In the print screen, you can actually choose to save it as PDF. That button to save as PDF is not clearly shown in the screen, so you actually have to hit print first and then click on save as PDF in order to save it as PDF if that's what you're trying to do. You can also print, or you can email from this screen as well. You're also going to have the save button right there. When you click on that drop down, you're going to see both options, export to PDF and export to Excel. So there's an alternative to exporting to Excel without having to go through the print. And this is where you export to Excel. So when you click on export to Excel, it will, right here on the bottom left of the screen, depending on what browser you have, you're going to see the file. You're going to be able to click download it, and that should open up Microsoft Excel or whatever you happen to have to open spreadsheets, and you should be able to see that report in Excel. Okay, and then you're going to see that little cog there, that little cog or gear, and let me hit refresh for a second so it gets in the right place. Okay, so a little cog or gear is basically a compact button. Like if I unclick the compact button, there'll be a little bit bigger spacing between accounts. If I click on that again and click on compact, you're going to see a little less spacing between accounts. Now that button is extremely important on other types of reports, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. On this report, which is a pretty straightforward before, that's really the only options that you have. Now in the top of the screen, you're going to see accounting method, cash or accrual. And I could probably spend a whole hour or the whole video just talking about these two. But in a nutshell, cash means that it will only show invoices that have been paid and they've been paid during the period of the report. And it will only show bills, accounts payable, that you have paid only if the payment happened within the date of the report. If you choose accrual instead, then you're going to see every invoice and every bill based on the actual transaction date, whether or not it has been paid. In other words, if you have open accounts receivable, those will show up on the report. If you have open accounts payable, those will also show up on the report. Now, when you make any changes here, like switching from cash to accrual, I still have to click on Run Report so the report refreshes. So that's actually a really important component. It's not just clicking on it, it's clicking on Run Report so it refreshes again. We have a couple other things here worth looking at. We have display columns by. We can click on the drop down and maybe break down this profit and loss by customer, assuming that I do track my sales by customer. If I click on report, we can see, and there it is. It looks like there's a whole bunch of customers with sales, and some of them have even expenses associated with them, but not all of them. And that will give you obviously a very big report. If I try to print this, it will probably span across multiple pages, or it would be the font will be really small. So in this case, this is the equivalent of what it would look like when it prints out on your page. So that may be a little bit difficult to read. You may want to change that from portrait mode to landscape. Maybe that will help a little bit. Okay, but if you're going to have a very long report like a P&L by customer, you may want to be careful about maybe limiting the amount of customers that you want to show or the time period. I mean, there could be different things. Okay, but you can also do other things here. Like I can do this fiscal year to date and do the columns by month. It's actually a very typical thing that people want to do, a monthly profit and loss report. And then we click on run. And let's do this fiscal year to date. I picked last fiscal year to date. Let me do this fiscal year to date and click on run report. And there you go. You're going to see your profit and loss based on the month. You can also go across 2 years if you want to. So let me go back and do 2017 through today. And then I'll do these broken down by year instead. And then click on run report. And then you get to see the two columns next to each other, 2017 and 2018. Okay, so there's a lot of really good things that you can do with this system. I mean, right off the box, the reports are really, really powerful. Now, a couple of really neat things too. Here where it says show non-zero or active accounts only, if I click on that drop down, by default, it will only show active. What that means is it will only show the columns that contain accounts, income, expenses, that actually have transactions inside of it. If I click on all instead of active, and then all instead of active, and then click on run report, you're actually going to potentially see some categories like all these here that have absolutely no transactions in it. But because they are part of your chart of accounts, they will still show in your report. So by default, if we don't select this option, the all, and which show active, regardless of how many accounts you have in your chart of accounts, they're all going to show up in there. So it's really up to you depending on what you're trying to achieve. Now, compared to another period, there's a great option. I typically don't do this if I'm doing multiple periods in the columns. So in this case, I'll go back to total only in this case, and then I'll go back to maybe this month and click on run report. And then I'm going to click on compare to period, and then I'm going to click on compare to PP, previous period. I'll click on that, and then I'll do, let's say, percentage change. So I'm doing previous period comparison, then percentage change, and then I'll click on run. Okay, and then you're going to notice that I see my profit and loss report, but this time, instead of showing me March and April in sequential order, it will show me April first, because that's my focus month. Okay, April is my focus month, and then it will show me March 2nd, and compare it with a previous period, and then give me the percent change, the difference, right next to it. That's actually a really great thing about the previous period change. Whereas if I weren't doing a previous period, but instead I were to do columns by month, and I were to select both months periods in the top. So I'm doing this different. I'm choosing a range of 60 days or 2 months, and then I'm choosing to do columns by month without any comparison. And I click on run report. Then I'm going to see the two in sequential order, March and April, and then a total summing the two together. So this is actually much different, looking at March and April in sequential order, than looking at maybe just April. Let's look at just April. So let's look at this month. And then no sequential order here. And then comparing with the previous period. I'll do it without the comparison dollar change. So it's very different focusing on 1 month and comparing it with the previous one versus showing 2 months back to back. So really important what you're trying to achieve. If you want to see a dollar change or a percentage change, that's really up to you. Another one that I get asked a lot is, what about this previous year? So previous year would be same month on the previous year. So if I'm looking at April of 2018 and I do a previous year, it will show me next to it April of 2017. Now in this file, I don't have any transactions to compare to, but that's, you get the gist of it. Okay. Then year to date is actually a really interesting one. A year to date, what it would do is it will show me all of the hit run reports. It will show me all of the month, so the month of April, and then it will show me January through April right next to it. And that has some significance. Some folks like to see that. Under that option, we also have a percentage of year to date. That's also pretty useful. So when I click on run report, you're going to see what percentage of the entire accumulated year to date that particular month represents. So 1899 represents 30.67% of my year to date, which is 6192. Now I don't use that one that often, but that's actually really important. Let me uncheck that. Let me click run report again. I'll show you one more thing that's really interesting. Let me go back to this fiscal year to date and click on run report. And then what I'll do is I'm going to select under the comparison. I'm not going to do the previous periods. What I'm going to do is do the percentage of income. That's actually a really common one. So when I click on percentage of income and click on run report, I'm actually going to see as a percentage of the 9809, which is my total income, every single number represented. So for example, my job expenses, 957, is 9.76% of 9809. Or for example, my miscellaneous, which is 200916, is 29.73% of 9809. So sometimes when we look at these numbers in absolute, so I'm going to take this away, I look at these numbers in absolute, and let me hit run report one more time. They may not mean much. They may not mean anything, especially if you don't own this company or work in this company. You're looking at these reports as an outsider. All these numbers are just numbers. Like, I don't know if that's a big number or a small number. Typically, that option, that percentage of income, gives you a lot of context, because most of the times income is the element that defines the company. It defines its customers, how much it sells, whether it's busy or not. Not that income means everything, because sales are a component of the very complex world of business, but they typically are, in accounting and finance, typically are the most significant number that people tend to look at. So that percentage of comparison to income becomes an important number. Okay, so that's how you run a profit and loss, and how you customize it in a nutshell by clicking on all the options that are given in front of you. Now there's a little button here on the top right called Customize. If I click on Customize, I get a couple of extra options, okay? We already got the report period, that was already pretty much defined. The accounting method, that was already displayed in the front page. But we also got a couple of things here that are pretty interesting. One is I can accept amount 0. That would actually omit zeros and put a blank instead. I actually don't like that. I like click on that and then click on Run Report, and then let me show all columns again. Click on Run Report. I like seeing those actual zeros there. For me, that's really, really important to see the zeros. I prefer that over seeing no information. So if I do that, you're gonna see blanks. I'm not a big fan of blanks. I believe that's a way too confusing to just have big blanks in there. So I actually like to show those zeros in there. I think they're significant. You also got a couple options without cents. That's actually pretty interesting. So that basically rounds up. You can do show red. That's if you want any negative numbers to show as red. That could be of significance. You can also choose whether you want the negatives to have a negative sign or to have parentheses. That's really up to you. I like when it has parentheses. And then we'll click on Run Report, and we can actually notice right here. See, that has a parentheses and a red because that's a negative number. Okay, and there's no sense in here. So it's really up to you. That's obviously all 100% aesthetics. Right? Like that's not necessarily that you have to go through this. This is obviously just your option. Then there's this option here called rows and columns, which basically shows all this information that's already displayed in the front, in the top. So I actually don't need to go through any of these because we already covered all these. Now filter is actually quite interesting. What filter allows me to do is to only show maybe components of the profit and loss. So let's say, for example, let me go back here for a second. Let's say that I don't want to see income and I don't want to see cost of goods sold. Maybe I only want to see expenses for whatever reason. So what I would do is I would click on Customize. Then I would click on this little filter button. And then under distribution account, I would click that checkbox. Then click the drop down. And then I'm going to pick all expenses. Right there, all expense accounts. That will only show me the expense accounts. Then I can click on Run Report, and that will narrow down to only the expense accounts. Now I could also get rid of all the rows that are not being used. I'm going to click on Active Only, and then click on on Run, and then that will only narrow it down to my expenses. And that could have some significance. It's really up to you. I mean, obviously the specific application of this would be unique. I'm going to take away the percentage of income and do a percentage of expense. That will give me a lot more context on the type of report that I'm running now. And I'm also going to do it by month and then click on Run Report. And you can start seeing, what kind of information you start seeing here, right? So I'm starting to see my job expenses, which were 39% of my expenses that month. Or there I look at my job expenses here in March, which was 21% of that month. So you start seeing reports in a different way, really, and start really maybe understanding what is it that you're looking for when you're looking at a report. I'm going to go back and click on Customize again. I'm going to click on Header and Footer. And we already looked at this here, which is the title of the report. We looked at that. The report period, we can actually uncheck that and not show that on the report. I'm going to click on Run. I'm not a big fan of not showing that. I think that would be very confusing to the report user. But again, it's really up to you what you're trying to achieve. And then the footer, like if I want to show the report basis, the date and time prepared, that's also really valuable. And of course, the alignment of that information if I want everything centered. And I click on Run and I go down and maybe I don't want to see any of this stuff here. So I would click on Customize Report and get rid of that. Again, not that that's a good idea to do that, but let's say, for example, on the header, I want to put everything left justified and click on Run. Okay, so now you see the header in the top, name, date range, name of the company, and then nothing on the bottom. And let's say that for whatever reason, this is a report that we're going to run quite usually, right? This is a report that we actually want to run quite usually. So we can actually customize it. After we're done customizing it, we're going to click on Save Customization. And then we typically want to title this something logical, like, okay, so expenses this year today by month. That's pretty good. I can add it to a report group. That's assuming that I want to create multiple reports, group them together, and maybe in some logical way run them together on one shot. that's possible. And shared with, that's if you want other users inside QuickBooks online to access the custom report as well. So we're going to go ahead and click on save. Okay, we don't have any other active users in there. So let me just make sure that I do a none here and type this again. Okay, whatever name I'm going to give it, and I'll click on save. And there you go. So if I happen to click out of this, and I clicked on many things in order to get to that report, I can click on reports, and I can click on custom report in the top now, and I can reach that report that I had done. So I can just simply click on it, and I will generate that report again with the new information in whichever date I happen to run that in. So that's actually a really valuable piece here as well. Okay, a couple options here that you see. You see who created the report. You see the date range that's pre-built on the report. Under email on schedule, that's letting you know that the report is not set up to be emailed automatically. You can simply change that by clicking on the drop-down menu here, and you can save as a PDF, Excel, or delete one time. But if I click on edit, the actual edit button, I can actually click on set email schedule, and I can say, look, every single month on the 30th, so let's do on the last, so the last is actually better. On the last, in this case, would be last Friday of the month, and I really don't need to end this, so that means I want to set it up forever. So every single last Friday of the month, I want this report to be generated for me. So I basically type the email of the person I want to send it to. I can change the title, the body of the email. I can also attach the report in Excel. I find that to be valuable, just a little bit extra. And I click on save and close, and this will automatically set an email with the report, with the updated numbers, to be sent to that whatever that user is. So you actually can just set it and forget it, and then every month you're going to get an email with that report and the Excel file for the report as well. Okay, let's run a balance sheet real quick. I'm going to click on balance sheet, and the components are pretty much the same. You can click on collapse. You can sort by big number, small number. You can show active rows, active accounts if you want to. Click all if you want to show even accounts with zero balance. So it's really up to you. If you want to do something like that, show the zero balance accounts. You can do the column comparison. You can do the period difference. Okay, there's no percentage of income, of course, because it's a balance sheet, and balance sheets don't show income. You also got the date range issue. When you click on customize, you get similar customization procedures. You get to customize filters as well. In the case of balance sheet, you don't get as many filters just because the report itself doesn't lend itself to too much customization, as a balance sheet must be pretty complete income and assets and liabilities in order for it to balance per se. But there's really not much you could do on balance sheet reports, right? So that, but you get about the same tools for customization. Now, let's look at a detailed report, a report that contains detailed transactions. So that's actually a little bit trickier, because what we looked at right now was summary reports. We look at the P&L summary and the balance sheet summary, and there's quite some limitations on the customization. But a detailed report can allow you to do a lot more things. So I'm actually going to go down here, and I'm going to click on For My Accountant, and then I'm going to look at transaction list by date. That's actually about the best report that you have in QuickBooks in terms of detailed information about transactions. So I'm going to click on that, and that's going to give you pretty much everything that's in QuickBooks, or about everything that's in QuickBooks in this type of report. So this report looks a lot different because you actually see transaction by transaction, line by line. And then from here, what you can do is you can group by, we can group them logically based on transaction type. That's actually a great option. And when you group by transaction type, you're going to see all the credit card expenses, all the checks, all the invoices, all the payments grouped together. So that makes it really easy to find transactions. You can also group them by customer, so you can see every transaction related to a customer, how it's grouped together. Same thing with a vendor, with a provider. You can do that, and you can see everything grouped by the vendor. You can also group them by account, very typical thing, being grouped by account. And we'll click on Run Report, and they're based on which account the transaction came from, And also if you scroll down, well, actually this is all which transaction it came from. So this is grouped by the source account, right? So this came from the bank account, from the accounts receivable, from the credit card. Okay, all that stuff would be here on the group by account. Let me go back to none for grouping. You can also sort here. You have different options here. For some reason, the only thing that you can't sort by is by amount. It's just a really weird fundamental flaw of the QuickBooks Online reporting system. For some really kooky reason, the programmers never thought that sorting by amount would be valuable. I mean, they're actually way wrong. It's extremely valuable, but for whatever reason, it's just not there. Now, another button that's going to really surprise you is this little gear button that didn't seem to do much on the profit and loss of the balance sheet report. But in here is crucial because when I click here, it says show more. I'm going to have this big list of all the possible columns of data that I want to show. So if I actually uncheck all these, okay, and I just leave one, date, transaction type, and amount, for example, and I click out of it, now it's going to narrow it down to only 3 columns. So you can actually choose what type of data do you want to see here. So I want to choose the name of the transaction number, right? All really common things. Whether it's a credit or a debit instead of an amount, that's actually an option as well. So you get a little bit more flexibility in terms of what columns you want to see. And then, from here you can choose or try to figure out what is the information that you're trying to look for. Okay, so when I click on the gear menu, I'm also going to pick the account. Let me just make sure the account is here. There you go. That's actually a really important piece with the account. I'm going to click out of it again. Make sure that's there. And you start seeing all the transactions from here. So it's actually a really interesting report to customize. Now, a similar report than the transaction detail, which was the transaction list by date. You also get the transaction detail by account, which is pretty much the transaction list by date with the account pre-selected. So you actually don't get a lot more. It's just ready with that grouping compared to just running it and then running the grouping. So it's not really that big of a difference. But then this one right here that says transaction list with splits, this is actually a little bit different. So with this previous report, we actually got the report set up line by line. In this case, each transaction is kind of separated based on the specific line items or the debits and credits in the transaction. So you can actually see all the debits and credits happening inside of the transaction. If I click on the gear menu here in the top right, I can actually click on show more, and I can show these in debit and credit format instead of amount, which I actually find it a lot more valuable as an accountant, right? For most users, maybe not. But here I can see, okay, what my credit was accounts payable, and my debit was job expenses. So you get another type of report that could be really useful. In this case, you're going to get all the details of each transaction. It's not as clean as the transaction list by date because that one could be exported into Excel. This one, kind of, not so much. You may have to do some finagling in Excel to be able to get this in a way that would be useful or meaningful in Excel. But in terms of just looking at it here, this is very useful information. For most people with basic knowledge of accounting, this would be a really good report to look at. Okay, let's go back to reports and let's look at a couple other reports. So another really commonly requested report is this one here called the General Ledger. The General Ledger essentially is pretty much a transaction list by date grouped by accounts, but it will show you the source account, right? So checking, bank, accounts receivable, accounts payable, all that stuff. And if I scroll down, I'm also going to see my income accounts and where are my expense accounts? Let me scroll down. There's all my income accounts and my expense accounts, right? So it's actually a transaction list by date that includes both transactions from the source account perspective and also from the category or the expense category, income category, the P&L account as well. So we get to see both. So this is similar than the transaction list with splits, but instead of splitting them in a single transaction, it organizes it based on both the source transaction and the line item or the line category of the transaction. So you get everything you have here. Pretty much everything in accounting is going to be boiled down to this general ledger report. I can also collapse these. Is actually kind of fun. You can sit there and collapse all these lines here. So I'm going to just collapse all of them. So I'm just sitting there and collapsing all the general categories here. And then you're going to see all the totals sum up here towards the bottom. So I collapse them all, and you basically just see the totals summed up. Now, after I collapse, if I mess with the reports at all, so I'm going to do the debit and credit thing that I usually do, you run the risk that the report will kind of just reset itself and open back up. So I probably should have done that before collapsing and expanding. Okay, so if you wanted to see debits and credits, you probably should have done that before collapsing. But that will give you a general idea. I'm just going to collapse the balance sheet accounts here just for show. Okay, so you see all the debits and credits pertaining to this account, and you see them all totalized, right? So you see my total debits, my total credits, and then amount would be the running balance in this case, right? The difference between the two. So this is also generally useful if you're trying to just see the activity in the accounts. Let me go back to reports. Another one that's commonly requested is the trial balance. Okay, because we're getting to about the same amount of information, just displayed different. The trial balance would be like a balance sheet and a profit and loss combined back to back, and you would see again all the accounts and all the debit totals, the debit balance, and the credit balance of each one. In this case, you're never going to see a number in the debit side and the credit side. You're going to see the net of the two, and depending on whether it's a positive number or a negative number and the type of account, it will land either in the debit or credit side. So this is basically like your full chart of accounts with your total activity for the month or the year, whatever it happens to be. That's what happens to be the trial balance. Other reports worth looking at is here under expenses and vendors, expenses by vendor summary. Very important report, very commonly run. It would actually organize all my expense transactions and group them based on the vendor and organize them on this report. Now in here, I can actually sort these by descending, because this is a summary report, and you can actually sort these by amount. On the detail you can, but on the summary you can't. And then if you're looking at any of these in particular and you want to kind of explore what it is, you just click on the dollar amount there, and it will take you to every single, it will take you to the profit and loss version of that. And then I can click on the detail again on the 2241 down there, and then it will take me to the specific individual transactions that got me there. Okay, so I can actually click on each of the transactions, invoice, bill, whatever. I can make modifications or inspect it at that point. So let me go back and go back to that expenses by vendor account again. So that's actually a really useful one. Okay, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. This is where customization helps, where I can click on report and say, you know what, I'm only looking for a specific group of vendors. I want to see the expense transactions for, and I'm just clicking a few at random here. So I'm going to pick the specific vendors I want to see, and I want to exclude the rest of them. And then the report gets a little shorter, and it only shows you pretty much the ones that you checked on. So that's expenses by vendor summary. And the last couple worth looking at is sales and customers. You're going to have something similar like sales by customer in this case, which are going to give you like expenses by vendor, but now on the sales side, all grouped by customer. Then you get to see the sales by item, which in this case will do a sales by product or service summary, which will be based on all the products that I buy and sell, the quantities, the amounts. Very powerful information right there in one click away. And then of course the accounts receivable reports and the accounts payable reports. So let's start with an accounts receivable aging report. This is going to give me all my customer balances grouped by based on how old they are. So if my customer hasn't paid me in 60 days, 90 days, 30 days, it will all be grouped and organized in here. Of course, I can click on any of these numbers and it will take me to the detail where I can actually see the individual transactions from what those numbers are composed of. So that's the accounts receivable aging report. And then finally, when we go to what you owe, we can see the counterpart on the accounts payable aging summary report. Same thing, based on the vendors, based on what you owe, all grouped on how late you are in paying. Let me go back to reports. So that's it with reports in a nutshell. Of course, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more reports. There's about 80 reports in total in QuickBooks Online Plus. There's also a management report, which will dedicate an entire different video for that. But I just wanted to kind of get you really comfortable with exploring the reports menu, all the different options that there are to looking at reports, and get you confident to work with QuickBooks, because there's probably going to be a report that gives you the information that you want. Thank you. If you like this video, hit like, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what I missed. What else should I be covering on our next video about reports? Thank you.